It's the best I can do. For whatever reason, it will not let me go live on landscape, so you guys are going to have to deal with vertical. Sorry.
God has called us to speak out for the voiceless, to stand up for those who cannot defend themselves. This November, we have an issue on the ballot. The issue is called murder. Amendment 3 will bring forth the constitutional right for all murder resolved. The least that we can do this November is vote no on Amendment 3. That is the least thing that we can do. But the most God-honoring thing that we can do is to, first and foremost, seek to honor and glorify God. Be faithful to His word. Be faithful to what He says. And the second is to love neighbor as yourself. It is not loving to allow murder to run rampant, the murder of children. We are called by God to expose evil. We are called by God to not partake in that evil. Ephesians 5:11. The least that we can do this November is vote no on Amendment 3. The most that we can do is to seek to honor and glorify God and what He says, and to love neighbor. It is not loving to your neighbor to allow child sacrifice to run rampant. And that's what Amendment 3 would allow for clinical abortions. But even after that, a mom can still order a pill and murder her child. We need to be against the oppression of children. We need to be against allowing murder of our preborn. Seek to honor and glorify what God says. This is coming November, so vote no on Amendment 3. Loving our neighbor by allowing our children to be murdered. We are to be a people that seek to honor and glorify God. The command by God to stand up for those that cannot defend themselves and to speak up for the voiceless. That command is not just for Christians, but also for everyone. We are out here tonight because first and foremost, we love God. And secondly, we love our neighbor. Since we love God, we seek to honor and glorify and uphold what He commands. And what He commands is that we should not shed innocent blood. Amendment 3 would allow the shedding of innocent blood, would allow from others to have the constitutional right to murder their children. Vote no on Amendment 3. We are called by God to seek to honor and glorify Him and to uphold His commands. God has called us out here to expose evil and not to partake in it. God has commanded that we are not to murder. That's what Amendment 3 would allow. Amendment 3 would allow for moms to have the constitutional right to murder her child. Amendment 3 would also bring forth taxpayer-funded abortions, taxpayer-funded transgender surgeries. Vote no on Amendment 3. We are called by God to protect our neighbor. We are called by God to speak out for the voiceless, to stand up for those that cannot defend themselves. This November, Amendment 3 would bring forth the allowance, the constitutional right for a mom to murder her child, all at the expense of the taxpayer. If you do not want your tax dollars to go toward funding for transgender surgery, for moms to murder her children, or even partial birth abortions, vote no on Amendment 3. We are called by God to seek to honor and glorify Him and to love our neighbor. How are we loving our neighbor? By allowing our children to be murdered. We live in a society today that does not care about their children, regardless if that child is in or out of the womb. You cannot refute it biologically nor theologically. Made in the image of God from the moment of conception, human being. God has said that we are not to murder, and we are to love our neighbor. The least that we can do is to vote no on Amendment 3 this November. Amendment 3 would bring forth taxpayer-funded abortions, taxpayer-funded transgender surgeries. That's what Amendment 3 would allow. If you do not want your tax dollars to go toward partial birth abortions, transgender surgeries, then vote no on Amendment 3 this November. We are called by God to love our neighbor. The least that we can do is to vote no on Amendment 3. Amendment 3 would bring forth the constitutional right for a mom to murder her child. It would allow for partial birth abortions, and it would allow for children without the consent of their parents to have transgender surgery, all at the expense of tax dollars. If you do not want your tax dollars to go toward the mutilization of children or the murdering of children, vote no on Amendment 3. We are called by God to cry out for those who have no voice, to stand up for those who cannot defend themselves. We are called by God, Ephesians 5:11, for everyone not to partake in evil and for everyone to expose that evil. Vote no on Amendment 3. It's the least that you can do for your preborn neighbor. How you doing, man? Hey, you know Jesus Christ? Vote no on Amendment 3 to protect your neighbor. If Amendment 3 is passed, children in the womb will be murdered. Amen.
Yeah, I know. I'm glad you guys stopped by. Oh, coming up around here.
But also, stand up and cry out for your preborn neighbor as we are commanded by God to do. As it says in Ephesians 5:11, no one is to partake in evil, and everyone is to expose that evil. When we are called by God, what is the most loving thing that we can do? First and foremost, obey what God says, and also bring that forth to our culture. We are first and foremost to seek to honor and glorify God, and secondly to love our neighbor as ourselves. How is it loving to murder someone? How is it loving to allow murder to go rampant? Amendment 3 would bring that in. Vote no on Amendment 3.
Hey, you want to come over and speak with us?
I can't understand you. If you want to come over and speak with us, my buddy does, but that doesn't mean anything, because we should love our neighbor as ourselves. You want to come have a logical discussion? Okay. What's your point for that question? Right, this is my neighbor. So the prerequisite to tell people that this is evil is, have I adopted? That's your logical argument. I can't say that this is evil. I can't say that this is murder if I have not fostered or adopted. That's your point. Come talk to me. Tell them to come talk to me. Thank you for picking that up. All good. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, let's just hope that more and more people, because I think Noah and Joel up there and that. And I know it's gonna help. Not getting close to probably next Friday, yeah. And next Sunday. After we wrap it up, we may not be able to typically from 11 per year at like 11:30. That's pretty much something. And of course, the fourth Saturday will be homecoming. We are called by God to seek to honor and glorify Him first and foremost, and secondly to love our neighbor as ourselves. We get foolish arguments, objections, like, are you a foster parent? Do you adopt? Why is that a prerequisite to speak on the matter of murder? To call that what this is evil? How foolish of an argument that is. That really is a foolish argument, right? Have you adopted? Are you a foster parent? No? Well, then you can't speak on matters that are evil. Doesn't make any sense. I should have told you that I was in a foster system and that I was adopted to. Then I should have left before. But yeah, I was in a foster system and adopted. But I typically don't think about it. I typically don't. You can always usually the one that reminds me of it. Because he knows like the previous you gotta find out. What? Yeah, true. I don't hold it as long. We are called by God to seek to honor and glorify Him. Ephesians 5:11 says that we are not to partake in evil, but to expose evil in our midst. This November, Amendment 3 would bring forth just that, evil. Clinical abortions, taxpayer funded. Post-birth abortion and partial birth abortion, taxpayer funded. Go no on Amendment 3. It's the least that we can do. I don't know if I told you guys this the other day. Actually, I think it was yesterday. Yeah, Saturday. Some guys like, women should be able to choose. At the expense of your tax dollars? The guy said, oh no, I'll vote no on Amendment 3. Yeah. They can do what they want, I just don't want to pay for it. And I agree. I mean, if someone wants to murder someone else, it should be at their own expense, not someone else's expense. But also, we shouldn't be okay with that. Amendment 3 would bring forth taxpayer-funded abortion, taxpayer-funded transgender surgery. If you cared about human rights, the least that you can do is vote no on Amendment 3 this November. God has called us that we are to expose evil, Ephesians 5:11, and not to partake in that evil. We are to love our neighbor as ourselves, but most importantly, we are to seek to honor and glorify God. We are to uphold what He says, His commands. And one of His commands is not to murder. How is it loving to our neighbor to allow murder to go rampant? Least of all, for that murder to be taxpayer funded. So the least you can do for your pre-born neighbor is vote no on Amendment 3. If you do not want your tax dollars to go to partial birth, post-birth, or full-term abortion, vote no on Amendment 3. Please let me share. You guys up here? Do you want your tax dollars to go toward abortion? Do you want your tax dollars to go to partial birth abortion? Do you want your tax dollars to go toward transgender surgery? Then vote no on Amendment 3. This November, Amendment 3 would bring forth partial birth, post-birth, and even full-term abortions clinically, all at the expense of our tax dollars. If you truly cared about human rights, the least that you can do is vote no on Amendment 3. The most that we can do is to seek fully to love our neighbor as ourselves, as God commands. And even more importantly than that, seek to honor and glorify God. The God that I speak of is Yahweh, the God of the Bible, without whom we cannot know anything. I would love to get an interaction with someone other than just someone just driving by who knows that they have a limited time frame to have a conversation. People want to push the have you adopted, have you fostered? Okay, why is adopting and why is fostering a prerequisite to be able to speak on the matter of murder? We are out here to expose evil as God has commanded us to do in Ephesians 5:11. God did not say, oh, in order for you to speak on the matter of child sacrifice, first you have to have adopted. First you have to have fostered. God does not bring forth that prerequisite. It is only the foolishness, the lunacy, the morality of man that says, in order for you to speak on the matters of evil, you have to be in that situation. Well, I'll tell you what, my preborn neighbor is in that situation, so I am allowed to speak on that matter. November 3rd, in November, Amendment 3 would bring forth taxpayer-funded abortion, taxpayer-funded transgender surgery. If you cared about human rights, the least that you can do is vote no on Amendment 3. We are called to love our neighbor. What is loving about allowing murder to run rampant? Sorry, I'm having some it's kind of tugging on me. We charge people all the time to come have a civil, logical discussion with us. But instead, they want to resort to drive-by heckling. Or, as of recent, stoplight heckling. They sit there trying to form a logical conclusion, all the while knowing that they don't have enough time to have the conversation flushed out. And when we ask them to come, have a logical discussion, to actually take the time to speak with us, they say no. They just drive away. They know that their conclusion, they know that their logic cannot stand. They want to say, in order for you to speak on the matter of child sacrifice, you have to have been a foster parent, or you have to have adopted. How stupid is that? Amendment 3 would bring forth taxpayer-funded abortion, taxpayer-funded transgender surgery. The least that we can do is vote no on Amendment 3 this November. We are called by God to speak out for those who cannot speak for themselves, the voiceless. We are called by God to stand up for the destitute, for the ones that cannot defend themselves. Amendment 3 would bring forth taxpayer-funded abortion. Amendment 3 would bring forth taxpayer-funded transgender surgery and even taxpayer-funded partial birth abortion. If you do not want your tax dollars to fund the murdering of children, or even the mutilization of children, vote no on Amendment 3. It's the least that we can do. Please Please, if you disagree with us, come reason. Please come have a civil, logical discussion with us. We would love to have a proper interaction with you. God has called us to love Him. God has called us to love our neighbor. What is loving about allowing murder of children to run rampant? Amendment 3 would bring forth taxpayer-funded abortion, taxpayer-funded transgender surgery. If you love God and love your neighbor, then the least that you can do is vote no on Amendment 3. We live in a society today that does not care about their children. That's why the foster system is so screwed up. That's why the adoption system is so screwed up. And that is why abortion is running rampant. We are called to love God and love our neighbor. Amendment 3 is the opposite of loving God and loving neighbor. Vote no on Amendment 3. The least that we can do this November is vote no on Amendment 3 to protect our children. We are called by God to love Him first and foremost and to love our neighbor. Amendment 3 would bring forth transgender surgery, which would mutilate people and also mutilate children. If you do not want your tax dollars to go toward transgender surgery or partial birth abortion or even post-birth abortion or any abortion at all, vote no. We are called by God to protect our neighbor. We are called by God to love our neighbor. If you do not want your tax dollars to go toward abortion at all, be it full-term, partial birth, or post-birth abortion, if you do not want your tax dollars to go toward transgender surgery, vote no on Amendment 3. Amendment 3 would make it so it's a constitutional right for a mom to murder her child. It would also make it to where we, the taxpayers, would fund those abortions. Our tax dollars would go toward transgender surgeries as well, even of those of minors. If you love your neighbor, if you care about human rights, the least that you can do is vote no on Amendment 3 this November. The most loving thing that we can do is vote no on Amendment 3. The least loving thing that we can do this November on the ballot is vote no on Amendment 3. But the most loving thing that we can do is to seek to honor and glorify God and go about how God wants us to live. God has called us to love our neighbor. How are we loving our neighbor? By allowing moms to murder their children. How are we loving our neighbor? By allowing children to be mutilated, but then transgender surgeries. Amendment 3 would bring forth taxpayer-funded abortion, taxpayer-funded partial birth abortion, and taxpayer-funded transgender surgery, even that of minors. The least that we can do for our neighbor is to vote no on Amendment 3. We are called to love God and to love our neighbor. We live in a society today that has no care for their children. A society that hates our children. A society that hates God. That is the reason why our foster system is so screwed up, because people hate children and people hate God. Same goes with adoption. And same goes with murdering a child in the womb. This November, Amendment 3 would bring forth taxpayer-funded abortion, taxpayer-funded transgender surgery, even that of minors. If you do not want your tax dollars to go toward the murdering or the mutilation of children, vote no on Amendment 3. That is the least that we can do. How is it loving to our neighbor to allow children to be murdered? Come speak with us. Amendment 3 would bring forth taxpayer-funded abortion. Amendment 3 would bring forth taxpayer-funded transgender surgery. If you care about children, if you care about your tax dollars going to fund evil, vote no on Amendment 3. God has called us to love Him first and foremost, to seek to honor and glorify Him. And what is the most honoring thing that we can do is to love our neighbor as well as God commands. The least that we can do this November is vote no on Amendment 3. If you care about children, if you care about human rights, let us seek to honor and glorify God in what He says, what He commands. That is the most honorable thing that we can do. Let us love our neighbor. Let us protect those that need protecting. The least that we can do for our neighbors this November is vote no on Amendment 3. If you do not want your tax dollars to go toward abortion, if you do not want your tax dollars to go support transgender surgery, then vote no on Amendment 3. The most honorable thing that we can do is first and foremost to seek to honor and glorify God. And out of doing that, we love our neighbor. The least that we can do this November is vote no on Amendment 3. How is it loving our neighbor to allow the murder of children to run rampant? This November, Amendment 3 would bring forth taxpayer-funded abortion, taxpayer-funded transgender surgery. Vote no on Amendment 3. If you do not want your tax dollars to go to abortion, vote no on Amendment 3. This November, if Amendment 3 passes, we all would be paying for abortions. Come talk to us. We have drive-by hecklers that have no care for any sort of intellectual integrity. They just drive by and give off some sort of nonsense. The language of a drive-by heckler is a moron and a coward. Do not be a moron or a coward today. Vote no on Amendment 3 if you care about our children. Amendment 3 would bring forth taxpayer-funded abortion, taxpayer-funded transgender surgery. If you care about where your tax dollars go, then vote no on Amendment 3. If you do not want to pay for someone to murder their child, vote no on Amendment 3. Let us seek to honor and glorify God. And in so doing, we love our neighbor. How is it loving to our neighbor to allow children to be murdered? And to say that the one that murders their child in the womb has no guilt in the matter? This November, let us stand up for those who cannot defend themselves. Let us cry out for those who have no voice. Amendment 3 would bring forth taxpayer-funded abortions. Vote no on Amendment 3. If you do not want your tax dollars to fund transgender surgeries, vote no on Amendment 3. If you do not want to pay for someone to murder their child in the womb, vote no on Amendment 3. We are called by God to seek to honor and glorify Him, and in so doing, we love our neighbor. We love our neighbor as ourselves. How is it loving to our neighbor to allow a child to be murdered? Not only that, at our own tax dollars. If you do not want to pay for someone to murder their child, vote no on Amendment 3. We should be a people that seek to honor and glorify God first and foremost. We should be a people that love God first and foremost. Not a people that seek to murder children in the womb. We should not be a people that rely on our own fallacious understanding. We should not be a people that are okay with funding from our own pockets for someone else to murder a child. That is what Amendment 3 would bring forth. If you do not want your tax dollars to go to fund abortions, vote no on Amendment 3. Let us care about our people and neighbors. Let us no longer be a society with darkened hearts. If we truly want the blessings that God promises and not the cursings that God promises, then we are to seek to honor and glorify Him and to keep His commandments. And with that, this November, the least that we can do is vote no on Amendment 3. Amendment 3 would bring forth taxpayer-funded transgender surgeries. Amendment 3 would bring forth taxpayer-funded abortion. If you do not want to pay for someone else to murder their child, vote no on Amendment 3. We are first and foremost to be a people that seek to honor and glorify God. And in that we seek to love our neighbor as ourselves. How is it loving to our neighbor to allow children to be murdered? To allow children to be mutilated with transgender surgeries. Amendment 3 would bring forth taxpayer-funded abortion, taxpayer-funded transgender surgery, even that of minors. Let us love our neighbor. That is the least that we can do. Vote no on Amendment 3. commandment of God is to love him above all, to worship him and none else. The second is like that, to love our neighbor as ourselves. How are we loving our neighbor if we are allowing children to be murdered at our own tax dollars? Amendment 3, if passed, would bring forth taxpayer-funded abortion, taxpayer-funded transgender surgery, even that of minors. The least that we can do for our neighbor this November is vote no on Amendment 3. If you do not want your tax dollars to fund a mom to murder her child, vote no on Amendment 3. If you do not want your tax dollars to fund partial birth abortion, vote no on Amendment 3. Let us seek God and love our neighbor.
Just checking the time. Okay, cool. Is what it is.
We are commanded by God to worship him and him alone. The God of the Bible, Yahweh, says that we are to love him and him alone above all else, to worship him and him alone and nothing else. He also says that we are to love our neighbor as ourselves. How is it loving our neighbor to allow Amendment 3 to go through? Amendment 3 would bring forth taxpayer-funded abortion. Amendment 3 would bring forth taxpayer-funded transgender surgery, even that of minors. If you do not want your tax dollars to go toward partial birth abortion, vote no on Amendment 3. We are first and foremost to seek to honor and glorify Yahweh, the God of the Bible. And secondly, love our neighbor as ourselves. It is not loving to allow murder of children to happen. Hey Joel, you doing alright, bud? Cool. Got a red light, nobody on it. We are called by God in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 11 to expose the evil in our midst and not partake in evil. The evil of our age is that of child sacrifice. And Amendment 3 would bring that forth at the expense of our tax dollars. If you do not want your tax dollars to fund abortion, vote no on Amendment 3. If you do not want your tax dollars to fund transgender surgery, vote no on Amendment 3. We are to seek to honor and glorify Yahweh, the God of the Bible. In Deuteronomy, Yahweh says that we are not to show partiality. Deuteronomy 16, we are not to show partiality, we are not to pervert or delay justice. We should only seek justice and only justice. If we want the blessings of God that God promises, then we will obey what he says. out of love for God, we obey his commands. As Jesus says, if you love him, you will obey his commandments. We are called by Yahweh, the God of the Bible, to seek to honor and glorify him first and foremost, and to worship him and him alone. And secondly, we are to love our neighbor as ourselves. How are we loving our neighbors to allow the murder of children, child sacrifice to happen in our midst? How is it loving our neighbor to have our tax dollars fund the murdering of children? Or even to have children mutilated in transgender surgeries? Remember, folks, Amendment 3 would be taxpayer-funded abortion, taxpayer-funded transgender surgery. The least that we can do is vote no on Amendment 3. Let us love our neighbor as ourselves, and first and foremost, let us love God. The least that we can do is vote no on Amendment 3. Hope you have a safe trip home, bud. We are called by Yahweh, the God of the Bible, to first and foremost worship him and him alone. Love him most of all. And secondly, we are called by Yahweh, the God of the Bible, to love our neighbor as ourselves. How is it loving our neighbor to allow an amendment to pass through, Amendment 3, and allow taxpayer-funded abortion, taxpayer-funded transgender surgery? The least that we can do this November is vote no on Amendment 3. If you do not want your tax dollars to fund abortion, vote no. We are called by Yahweh our God to love neighbor as ourselves. We are called by Yahweh, the God of the Bible, to worship him and him alone, and to love him above all else. And secondly, we are called by Yahweh to love our neighbor as ourselves. How is it loving our neighbor to allow Amendment 3 to pass? If Amendment 3 goes through, that is taxpayer-funded abortion. If Amendment 3 goes through, that is taxpayer-funded transgender surgery. The least that we can do for our children to keep them from being mutilated is vote no on Amendment 3. If you truly cared about children, if you truly cared about your neighbor, human rights, you would vote no on Amendment 3. This November, Amendment 3, guys, would bring forth taxpayer-funded abortion. If you do not want your tax dollars to go toward partial birth abortion or even transgender surgery of minors, if you cared about where your tax dollars went, you'd vote no on Amendment 3. Because that's what it would bring forth if it passes. Amendment 3 would allow for taxpayers to be funding, not by choice, abortion. We would be forced to fund transgender surgery and abortion. If you truly cared about your neighbor, the least that you can do is vote no on Amendment 3. Proper interactions, all we've got so far is drive-by heckling and a pitiful excuse at a logical argument. We are called by Yahweh, our God, the God of the Bible, to worship Him and Him alone, to love Him above all else. We are commanded by Him to seek to honor and glorify Him and to obey what He says, to obey His commandments. Yahweh also says we are to love our neighbor as ourselves. How are we loving our neighbor? By allowing Amendment 3 to pass. Amendment 3 would bring forth taxpayer-funded abortion. Amendment 3 would bring forth taxpayer-funded transgender surgery of minors. If you do not want the children of our land to be murdered or mutilated, vote no on Amendment 3. That is the least that we can do this November. If you do not want your tax dollars to fund abortion or transgender surgery, vote no on Amendment 3. Vote no on 3. Come talk to me. Have a logical argument. Don't be a fool or coward. Another drive-by heckler called me a female dog. See, that's the most logical argument that they can come up with. It's a pitiful excuse. Let us obey God this November. Let us obey Yahweh, the God of the Bible. The least that we can do this November is vote no on Amendment 3. If you do not want your tax dollars to fund abortion, vote no. If you do not want your tax dollars to fund transgender surgery of minors, vote no on Amendment 3. Remember, Amendment 3 equals the murder of the children and the mutilization of children, all of which will be taxpayer funded. We will have no choice but to fund abortion. We will have no choice but to fund transgender surgery if Amendment 3 passes. The least that we can do this November is vote no on 3. Amendment 3 would bring forth mutilated, murdered children, all of which would be taxpayer funded. Let us love our neighbor.
I am getting quite a few people that are rolling down their windows. So that's good. What's this crazy man with the beard got to say this time? Crazy thing. Crazy thing that I want to say is that we should, protect our children, love our neighbors. I know, it's pretty crazy, right?
This November, the least that we can do on the ballot is vote no on Amendment 3. That is the least that we can do. If you do not want your tax dollars to fund the murder of children in the womb, vote no on 3. If you do not want your tax dollars to fund transgender surgery of minors, vote no on 3. Amendment 3 is an abomination before God. The God of which is Yahweh, the God of the Bible. Yahweh says that we should love our neighbor as ourselves. How is it loving to our neighbor to allow an amendment to pass, Amendment 3? And if Amendment 3 passes, that's taxpayer funded. We have no choice but to fund abortions. Come talk to me. Don't be a moron, don't be a coward, come talk to me. See another drive-by heckler just yelling, you're a loser and F you. See, that's all they got. They know that they have no foundation to bring forth any sort of argument. All right, go ahead, tell me. Give me a solid argument on why we should allow the murder of children. I'll wait. It's kind of funny. They're like, F you, because you don't want children to be murdered. You're a loser because you don't want children to be murdered. Yeah, okay, cool. Try to challenge them, bring forth a logical argument for why. They can't bring one. So the drive-by heckler is a moron and a coward. How are we to obey Yahweh, our God? Yahweh, the God of the Bible. Yahweh, the God of the Bible, says that we are to worship Him and Him alone, and to love Him above all else. He also says, secondly, that we are to love our neighbor as ourselves. How is it loving our neighbor to allow an amendment to pass that would bring forth taxpayer funded? We would have no choice but to fund abortions. Amendment 3 would bring forth taxpayer funded abortions, taxpayer funded transgender surgery of minors. The least we can do is vote no on 3. In the end, they just hate God. They love their sin. They hate children. At least Kanoa up the sidewalk, every now and then he'll actually get people that pull over, and they try to bring forth a logical defense, but Kanoa's like, okay, yeah, cool, go ahead, bring it forth.
then they just, you know, scurry away. Yahweh, the God of the Bible, says that we are to love our neighbor as ourselves. How is it loving our neighbor to allow an amendment to pass that brings forth the constitutional right for a mom to murder her child? Amendment 3 would bring forth taxpayer-funded abortion, taxpayer-funded transgender surgery of minors. If you do not want your tax dollars to go toward funding the murder of children or children being mutilated, vote no on 3. That is the least that we can do this November for our neighbor. The least that we can do to love our neighbor this November is vote no on Amendment 3. If you do not want your tax dollars to fund wickedness, evil, mutilization, vote no on 3. This guy's getting to be like a nice gloomy gray. This is the type of weather that reminds you, oh yeah, fall. In a sky like this. Praise be to God for a night, for a day to tell people to stop murdering the children. If you guys do not want your tax dollars to fund transgender surgery, vote no on Amendment 3. If you do not want your tax dollars to fund abortion, vote no on 3. Amendment 3 would bring forth taxpayer-funded. We would have no choice as taxpayers to pay for someone to mutilate a child with transgender surgery. We would have no choice to fund someone to murder their own child in the womb. If you do not want your tax dollars to fund a mother murdering their child in the womb in a clinic, vote no on 3. If you do not want your tax dollars to fund transgender surgeries, vote no on 3. Thank you, sir. The guy was driving the Jeep. Some Jeep owners at the outfit like, that Jeep Cherokee's not a Jeep. If you don't want your tax dollars to fund transgender surgery, vote no on 3. If you don't want your tax dollars to fund abortion, vote no on 3. That is the least that we can do for our children. Sadly, we live in a society today that does not care about their children. Because ultimately they hate God. We have a society that hates God and by extension hates their neighbor. Because as Yahweh says, if you say that you love God, but you hate your neighbor, you are a liar. Because you do not in fact love God. Because God says that if you love Him, if you love Yahweh, you will keep His commandments. And one of His commandments is love your neighbor as yourself. Hey, come talk to me. If you disagree, don't be a moron or a coward. Come talk to me. Are we wrapping up? Are we wrapping up? Oh, okay.
First time I've ever been out.
Are you able to hear me over there? Or?
Barely.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That's fine. Yeah.
As far as what we planned, I don't know.
Right. It might go on a little bit longer. I don't know. And I'm fine with that. I would definitely love to get a lot of interaction. Some actual, like, proper arguments from people instead of just a drive-by heckler. So. Yahweh, the God of the Bible, says that we are to love our neighbor as ourselves. How are we loving our neighbor? By allowing an amendment to pass that would bring forth mutilated children and murdered children, all at the expense of our tax dollars. If you do not want your tax dollars to fund abortion, if you do not want your tax dollars to fund transgender surgery of minors, then vote no on Amendment 3. Let us love our neighbor. That is the least that we can do this November. That person doesn't have their headlights on. Please turn your headlights on. You too. Let us obey Yahweh, the God of the Bible, this November by voting no on Amendment 3. That is the least that we can do for our children. If you do not want your tax dollars to fund transgender surgery of minors, vote no on 3. Our tax dollars, we would have no choice but to fund abortion. If Amendment 3 passes, vote no on 3. If you do not want your tax dollars to go toward funding mutilating children or murdering them, vote no on 3. That is the least that we can do this November. The most that we can do is to absolutely love God and love our neighbor. Yes, let us seek to honor and glorify God as God commands. God says, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. That's from Yahweh. It's like Joel's got an interaction with someone. Like Joel's getting all the fun over there. We are called by Yahweh, the God of the Bible, to worship Him and Him alone and to love Him and nothing else above Him. And secondly, we are called by Yahweh, the God of the Bible, to love our neighbor as ourselves. How is it loving our neighbor? By allowing an amendment to pass that would bring forth taxpayer-funded abortion, taxpayer-funded transgender surgery. If you do not want your tax dollars to go toward the wickedness of mutilating children or even murdering them, vote no on Amendment 3. Let us love our neighbor this November. That is the least that we can do. Vote no on Amendment 3. Let us seek to honor and glorify God first and foremost. And secondly, let us love our neighbor. For everyone is made in the image of God. How are we to obey God, Yahweh, the God of the Bible? How are we to obey God this November with Amendment 3? Because God says that we are to love our neighbor as ourselves. God says that we are to expose evil. This November, Amendment 3 would bring forth taxpayer-funded abortion. Amendment 3 would bring forth taxpayer-funded transgender surgery of minors. If you do not want your tax dollars to go toward evil, vote no on Amendment 3. That is the least that we can do this November. Let us love God and love neighbor. God says, if you love me, you will keep my command. Let us vote no on 3 this November. I don't know about you, Joel, but I'm hankering for a proper interaction with someone, you know? I would love to hear someone bring forth some sort of logical argument for why it's okay to murder people. We can't find anyone.
Windows rolled up in silence.
Right, right. Or they say stuff like F you, or you're a loser, or you're a female dog. I think that's my favorite one. You're a female dog. Well, of course, they're not saying actual female dog, they're, you know, but get the idea. Or they'll call me an a-hole, you know, whatever. If that's the best that you can bring as far as a logical argument, man, I feel sorry for you. But sadly, that's the language of the drive-by heckler, guys. The best that the drive-by heckler can muster as far as a logical argument is F you, you're an a-hole, you're a loser, my body, my choice. Like the stupidity of that, come on. Or best yet, what they'll do is they'll roll the window down, hang out the passenger window, just listen to you during the entirety of the red light, and then as soon as the light turns green, they'll spout off some nonsense. Because they realize that, yeah, they have no logical argument for why we should allow for murdering of children. I think they're just more so frustrated with themselves, you know. Ooh, I'm so frustrated that I can't bring forth a logical argument for why it's okay to murder someone. Oh yeah, mom should be able to murder the children in the womb. But I don't have a logical reason for that.
So I'll just say F you. Yeah, it's because they're angry at themselves. Also, ultimately, they hate God. And by extension, if they hate God, they hate their neighbors. So, of course, they're going to be okay with children being mutilated or children being murdered. So, can't expect much. What I'll do is put this vote no thing right here. Lord willing, it sticks. Don't want that bad boy to be flying away, especially with that mic on there. People think that we're crazy for being out here. All we're doing is, telling people not to murder each other. Telling people it's wrong to mutilate children. Telling people it's wrong to murder a child. Man, that's really crazy.
Yahweh, the God of the Bible, says that we are to love our neighbor as ourselves.
But no, it says he's done and wrapped
Okay.
up.
And how is it loving to our neighbor to allow an amendment to pass that would bring forth forceful taxpayer-funded abortion? If you truly loved your neighbor, if you cared about human rights, you would vote no on Amendment 3. Amendment 3 would bring forth taxpayer-funded, forced funding from the people for someone to commit an abortion. Taxpayer-funded transgender surgery. That's what Amendment 3 would bring forth. You care about where your tax dollars go. If you don't want to fund someone to mutilate a child, vote no on 3.
Alright, I'm wrapping. This couldn't always wrap it up, I'm wrapping. That was fun. Sadly, I had to do portrait instead of landscape. It's dumb. Is what it is.